I used to work at Apple until 2010, and then I left. And since that time, I've been traveling the world and meeting people and talking to people about what they're trying to do. A lot of app makers, but believe it or not, just all kinds of people. Everybody's trying to do something, and we end up having this what's kind of the same conversation every time. And obviously there are exceptions, but for the most part, they tell me what they're trying to do. I tell them what they need to be doing instead. They do the thing they were going to do anyway, and then they fail. That's because they're not focusing on the most important thing, right? The most important thing is the thing that, if you're not focusing on the most important thing, whatever you're trying to do is going to fail because you're focusing on the wrong thing, right? That doesn't mean that the thing that you're focusing on is not important. It doesn't mean that other things are not going to have to get done. But if you're not focusing on the most important thing, then that's going to fail, and then everything else is going to fail because everything else is, by definition, less important, right? Here's a very easy example. There are so many ways to die, right? I mean, I think I've worried about all of these things at one time or another. I go to take a flight and I'm afraid that something's going to happen to the flight. I hear firecrackers and I'm afraid that I'm going to get shot by gunfire. I mean, there are so many different ways to die. There are so many different things that we worry about. But here's the reality of things. If you are a smoker, that is probably how you're going to die. Obviously, there are exceptions, but for the most part, that's what it is. If you're a smoker, then that's what's going to kill you. Because even though we can worry about all of these things the same amount, they're not all equally likely, right? And we have numbers for this. Like, here's a graph that correlates the chance of something killing you to the area of a circle. So you can sort of see the relative risks of different things, right? Big circles include heart disease, cancer, stroke, respiratory disease is the same size as stroke, and everything else is really much smaller, right? So you might say, well, there's lots of different ways to get cancer, but again, we can look at all the different ways you can get cancer, and far and away, tobacco is the biggest one, right? So now, okay, look, I smoked for half my life. I know, I get it, smoking is awesome, but it's also going to kill you, and that's why you shouldn't smoke. Or at the very least, if you're going to keep smoking, you should stop worrying so much about, for example, people say, like, I don't want to eat bananas because they're radioactive, right? I don't want to get an X-ray at the airport because it's radioactive, or I'm worried about Fukushima because of the radiation. Now I'm going to go have a cigarette. If you're a smoker, your lungs are the most radioactive thing in this room, by far. That's the reality of things. So either quit smoking or get used to the fact that you're going to die from smoking. Don't worry about anything else. That is the most important thing. Now when it comes to business, it's a little bit different. So with business, what tends to happen, well, here's what people think is the most important thing. VC funding. This is number one what I hear from people. What's holding us back is we don't have VC funding, usually because of where you live, right? When I talk to developers in Milan, they say in Milan we don't have good VC funding and that's why businesses in Milan do not succeed. In Amsterdam, people say in Amsterdam we don't have good VC funding and that's why it doesn't succeed. In San Francisco, people say, well, there's VC funding, but I'm not hanging out with the right people, and so that's why it's not going to succeed. I have never in my life spoken to someone whose business is being held back because they cannot find VC funding. This is an absolute lie. And the reason is very simple. There is so much money in the world right now, way too much money in the world. There's nothing to invest in. People are, putting money in the bank at a negative interest rate at this point, right? If you have any idea, with even a 10% chance of success, anywhere in the world, VC will find you. They'll move you to California if necessary, but they will fund you. If you're not getting funding, it's not because of where you live, it's because you think about business the wrong way. This is the thing that people get wrong. They think about business the wrong way, right? Here's a typical pitch that I hear. Most of the pitches I hear go along these lines. I have an idea for some software, and I'm looking for a technical co-founder to make it for me, and I'm looking for a venture capitalist to pay them and me. And it's like, well, gosh, there's a couple of things wrong with this problem. Number one, why would a technical co-founder want to work with you, right? Why would VC want to fund you, right? So many people concentrate on what I want and what I need, and they don't pay attention to what other people want and what other people need. Look at people's dating profiles, right? It's always like, this is what I'm looking for, but there's no consideration as to why would somebody like that be interested in you, right? And with business, it's very much the same way. Whenever somebody tells me, we're changing the world, my eyes start rolling right away. Not because changing the world is not important. Changing the world is definitely important. It's just that whenever somebody starts a pitch with, we're going to change the world, they're always about to tell me something ridiculous. The last time I had somebody tell me they were going to change the world, they said, we are changing the world by making it easier for people to make avatars of themselves. I couldn't tell if they were being ironic or not. I don't think they were. I hoped that they were, but I don't think that they were. Yes, making avatars does change the world. Using the toilet also changes the world. Breathing air changes the world. That's not what it's about. This is the problem with people's pitches, right? When people are thinking about a business that they want to build or something like this, they're thinking not in terms of what the market actually wants. They're not thinking about what their alleged customer base is actually interested in. They're mostly concerned with what they themselves want to build. Most business pitches that I hear boil down to this. I have somehow justified in my head how the world wants what I want to give it. And that's almost never how it works. If you have a great idea for some software, I have really bad news for you. People do not want more software, right? If your pitch is, all of that software you have to use, all of that, stuff that you have to worry about in your life, here's one more thing for you to worry about. Nobody wants that. That's not what people want, right? And so if you're adding something to the pile of available ways to spend your time and spend your money, you're not giving the world what it wants, and you're almost guaranteed to fail. Now, if you want to be successful, what you need to do is you need to find something that is in fact a giant pain in the ass, right? You need to find something that people are already doing that is taking a lot of time and taking a lot of money, and then you need to invent a way for them to spend less time and less money. And then it's a no-brainer. And then why wouldn't they buy your product? That is what we call a value proposition, right? A value proposition is, if you're trying to make software, if you're trying to be successful in business, a value proposition is the most important thing. I mean, look at the software out there that actually makes money. Look at the software that actually charges a good price. Like tax accounting software, for example. Right? You're already having to pay taxes. You're already either spending too much time on it because you're not a tax accountant, or you're spending a lot of money on a tax accountant. So here's a piece of software that will do it in less time for less money. Why wouldn't you? Right? That's why it becomes very successful. Now, a lot of times people will have a good idea for a business, but they mistake that as a good idea for software. Here's an example I heard recently. Drinking water, great business. Somebody said there's a lot of misinformation out there. And so I want to build some software that when people are on social media and they're confused about the issues, it will say, hey, here's a fact sheet with all of the facts and what you can do and everything that you need to know. And all I need is a technical co-founder to build it and a VC to fund it. It's actually kind of a good idea. Maybe. But here's the great thing. For me, good news. You don't need a technical co-founder for that. You don't need VC funding. You don't need to, wait another day. If you're passionate about informing people about the facts, all you have to do is find something that people are confused about, put together a list of facts, and go on social media and look for them to be talking about it and point them to your fact sheet. It's not a technical problem. It's a business building problem. And they're like, no. I don't want to do that. I don't want to build a business. Here's the thing about great business ideas. A great business idea does not start with software. A great business idea starts with putting people into place to have workflows to create a kind of self-running machine where people become interchangeable parts so that the overall structure will do what it needs to do. That's what we call a business. If you have a great idea for changing the world, at best it is a great business idea for building a business, for putting people and workflows into place to do something at some level of efficiency. And then maybe you can start looking at software to make those workflows, make those people more efficient. That is the power of software. Software accelerates workflows. Software does not replace the step of building a business. Software is not a magical thing where you can just kind of come up with ideas and then suddenly they're worth money. That's not how it works. If you're trying to build a software business, you need to find other businesses that are building a business and make their business more efficient. That's how you make money at this game. Most of you probably think that that sucks, and it does. It would be way better if you could just have ideas and turn them into money. But that's just not how the world actually works. But don't get me wrong, because this idea of software accelerating workflows, this is an incredibly powerful thing. That's why what we do, whether we realize it or not, is so important. That's why we have so much power in the world, because accelerating workflows is very powerful. Here's a nice metaphor that I like to use for this. You know how a cell works? A cell, like the cells that make up our body or a plant or any other living thing, a cell is a big bag of chemicals. And the chemicals are reacting more or less at random. But then the DNA in the cell encodes for proteins. The proteins are folded into enzymes, and the enzymes act as catalysts to accelerate this chemical reaction or that chemical reaction. And depending on which chemical reaction is accelerated, the cell is going to be a certain thing, the cell is going to behave a certain way. We are the enzymes of this planet. That is the important thing to realize. The workflows that we accelerate determine whether this planet is going to be like a brain cell, or it's going to be like a muscle cell, or it's going to be like some particularly dumb cell. What do I mean by a particularly dumb cell? Well, consider, for example, algae, right? Algae, single-celled organism, pretty dumb. Because what algae does is it just sort of doubles and doubles and doubles and doubles until eventually there's no more resources for it, and then it just kind of all dies, right? I call this the power of doubling. This should be very familiar to all of us because in software, of course, we all speak in binary, right? We all know the binary digits. We all understand powers of 2, right? So you can be talking to a biologist about algae, and you can say, well, if you have one algae cell, then that's going to split into 2 algae cells. That's going to become 4 algae cells. That's going to become 8 algae cells, 16, 32, 64, 128, etc. Right? It just goes on and on. And we do these things in our head all the time with computers, and we very quickly lose track of the numbers, because by the time you get to 32 bits, it's like 2 billion. And by the time you get to 64 bits, it's like 9 quintillion, right? These numbers get very big very quickly. But that's not what always happens, right? That's how single-celled organisms behave. Multi-celled organisms, such as a human being, something else happens. Our cells double and double and double and double, but then eventually they stop doubling and the system sort of stabilizes into something like this. Better enzymes. So here's the thing. I'm not just talking about this because it's an interesting metaphor. I'm talking about this because really the reason why I'm here today is to talk about what the world actually needs, to talk about what is actually the most important thing, right? Because even though our bodies are very smart in you know, the way that they stop their doubling, our population is not, right? Our population has continued to double and shows kind of no sign of ceasing to double, right? And you might say, well, what are you talking about? The population doesn't double, right? The size of the economy doesn't double. The economy grows at an average of 3% per year. But 3% per year growth will double the size of the economy or the population in 23 years, right? So when you actually look at any metric you want about humans on the Earth, you end up with something that looks like this. This is the population of humans since the year 1900. This is an exponential growth curve, right? This is a hockey stick. If you show this to a VC, they'll get very excited because this is what they're looking for. You know, and when we talk about, you know, using software to build businesses and get rich, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for exponential growth. But we shouldn't be, because this is what happens next, is collapse. And so this graph is not just a made-up imaginary graph. This graph is actually scenario 1 of what's called the World 3 model, which was published by an organization called the Club of Rome, down the street from here, I imagine. And it's actually a projection of what we're doing as a species, of our future. It tells us that we're going to have a super awesome time of exponential growth, and then we're going to fall off of a cliff. And this is important for a number of reasons, not the least of which because it's, you know, billions of dead humans. This is important because this model is like 44 years old, right? It's easy to make a model and say, well, that's just a model, there's no data to back that up. But we have 44 years of data that show that World 3 is very accurate. And it goes further than that because, so here's the thing, when this was published in 1972, the recommendation was basically that we needed to sort of start throttling back on growth. And the way that we do that is by cutting our dependence on fossil fuels, on increasing our efficiency in the use of energy, on increasing our efficiency in the use of land, and by the very simple measure of empowering women, letting them make their own reproductive decisions, and letting the population sort of naturally hit a stable state. Right? A lot of times people will say like, oh, the Club of Rome, they're all about like population control. It's like, really they're not, because you don't need population control, right? If you just empower people to make their own decisions, then the population declines naturally. Any country in the so-called Western world has a declining population. So if we had done that, then in the course of 20 years, we would have changed the fate of our civilization and we would have had a nice, easy time of it. But that's not what happened. Instead, what happened, also predicted by the model, is that we said, no, technology will save us. We will just get more efficient at extracting energy, and we will just, you know, there's way more oil than we think there is. There's infinite amounts of coal. We're just going to double down on this whole thing. And what we end up with instead is a curve that you get a couple of decades of extra time, and then everybody dies that much faster. We see this all the time. right? The financial crisis of 2008. If any of you saw the movie The Big Short, which I highly recommend, they talk about how they realized that the housing bubble was going to pop, but rather than let the housing bubble pop, they just held it off as long as possible, and then when it popped really hard, right? We see this now with the price of oil, where the price of oil should be skyrocketing, but it's being held artificially low so that when it finally ends, it's just going to go crazy. So these big scary graphs are from a paper called Human-Nature Interaction in World Modeling with Modelica, which is, it's a fun computer science topic for certain definitions of fun. I recommend giving that a read. And if you're not really a reading person, I gave a presentation all about that model, including just a deep dive on the math and the programming involved in coming up with these graphs and these numbers at UIConf in Berlin last year. So you can check that out as well. There's a lot more to this world modeling stuff, but other than sort of bringing it up, that's not really the focus of why I'm here. The focus of why I'm here is to really bring to bear the most important thing, which the organizers thought was a typo in my description. The title of this talk, The Most Important Thing, is from a video of Steve Jobs. If you just search for Steve Jobs' Most Important Thing, there's a video of an interview that he did years ago. And he said something that just really stuck with me, like really resonated with me. So I'm just going to read what he said. He said that when you grow up, you tend to get told that the world is the way it is, and your life is just to live your life inside the world. Try not to bash into the walls too much, try to have a nice family life, have fun, save a little money. But that's a very limited life. Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact, and that is that everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it. You can influence it. You can build your own things that other people can use. And the minute that you understand that you can poke life and actually something will, if you push in, something will pop out on the other side. You can change it. You can mold it. That's maybe the most important thing, is to shake off this erroneous notion that life is there and you're just going to live in it versus embrace it, change it, improve it, make your mark upon it. I think that's very important. And however you learn that, once you learn it, you'll want to change life and make it better, because it's kind of messed up in a lot of ways. Once you learn that, you'll never be the same again. It's kind of messed up in a lot of ways, but we have the power to change it. I'm going to talk about some of the ways that it's messed up, and then I'm going to talk about changing it. This is the latest scary graph that's been going around lately. I don't know if any of you have seen this on social media. This is a graph of sea ice in the world, just sort of a year-over-year graph where you can see basically that what has been a decline has turned into just kind of a giant dip, right? Where right now the Arctic is 20 degrees Celsius hotter than it's supposed to be. Ice is supposed to be reforming, but it's not. And climate scientists are very careful. They're very quick to point out that, usually we don't look at the Arctic and the Antarctic together because they're different, and, this is an anomalous event, right? But this is the thing. They're all anomalous events, right? Last year it was, like a polar vortex, right? That was supposed to be trapped around the poles that was dipping, right? Weather anomalies are happening more and more, right? 100-year floods are happening every year. I was just in Taiwan, and 4 years ago I was there, and I went up to the top of Taipei 101, which is the world's second tallest building, and they had this big thing there called a tuned mass dampener. For an engineering nerd like me, I'm very excited about this. It's like a 67-ton ball of steel that keeps the building balanced. I went back, this year, 4 years later, and now when you go to look at the tuned mass dampener, there's world records set by the dampener, world records set Like world record set, the thing moved like a meter, right? Because of things like typhoons. All 3 of those world records happened in the last 4 years. In Australia right now, there's like massive flooding for like the 2nd, 3rd time in the last 5 years. You have people who are dying from weird forms of asthma, which are just freak occurrences. But like this is the thing, is that our society is built to handle the occasional disaster. It's built to handle the occasional freak occurrence. And what we're seeing is that the freak occurrences are happening more and more often so that the system is becoming overwhelmed, right? To me, the scary thing about people in Australia dying from some weird form of asthma caused by weird thunderstorms is that they died because the ambulances couldn't get to them fast enough. They died because the infrastructure is not built to handle this stuff, right? Like when I was a kid, when the power would go out, it would go out for a couple of hours. But a few years ago, I was in Seattle, the power went out for 10 days. People are just not equipped for the power to go out for 10 days. What would you do if the power went out for 10 days? What would you do if you couldn't go to the grocery store for a week? Most of us have no idea. And the fact is, that's the world that we're living in now. This has gone from being some theoretical problem that we need to worry about in the future to a thing that is actually happening now. The system is beginning to fall apart. And we're relatively protected from it because we live in kind of the rich, built-up part of the world. But it's starting to affect us too, right? It's like William Gibson said, the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And we always assume that that means the good future and that we get it first. But that's also true of the bad future, and the rest of the world gets that first. And now it's on our way to us. So what do we do? I think it kind of depends. I think it kind of depends on how you react to this information. I think for some people, you just don't want to hear this stuff. You just don't want to believe this stuff. And I get that. That was me for years, pretty much my whole life, right? World 3 came out in '72. I was born in '76. People have been talking about this stuff for my whole life. And I've tried very hard to ignore it. And it's finally gotten to the point where I've learned enough that I just can't ignore it anymore. But the way that I deal with hard information is to try to figure out what to do about it. I'm an engineer. That's what I do. I fix things. And so what do we do? Well, there's a lot of different opinions about this. I think that there's just recently a really nice documentary by Leonardo DiCaprio, right, where he talked about some of the things that you could do right now, right? Like when you go and you have lunch and they say beef or chicken, if you don't care, go chicken, right? Stop eating beef. Beef uses an enormous amount of resources. Most of the methane in the atmosphere is from beef cows. I had no idea. Stop eating palm oil, right, which is a cheap form of oil, which they just cut down rainforests in Indonesia to grow that stuff. And when you think about what that means, like palm oil is in every packaged food, right? Start looking at the ingredients for palm oil. And when you see palm oil, it means that a rainforest was destroyed in order to make that thing. So what that comes down to is stop eating packaged foods, right? Start eating fruits and vegetables, like real food, right? I mean, I realize this is Italy. This isn't such a weird thing to say that you should eat real food, but nevertheless, right? And political will. I mean, this is a very challenging time because we're kind of entering this age of fascism where instead of dealing with the things that we need to be dealing with, our government is just becoming increasingly militaristic in order to just deny that this is happening, so that little by little, as people are sort of excluded from the failing economy and the failing world system, the rest of us will just turn their back on them and not do anything, so that eventually the only people who will be left are the richest people with the biggest boats who will have robots doing everything for them, and that'll be it for civilization. I have a feeling that if we were to look at other planets closely enough, instead of saying, why are there no civilizations, we would say, how come all these planets have like 6 people on boats floating around the ruins of their civilization? And that's because of the same thing that we're doing. Now, I think that for most of the people in this room who just don't want to believe in this stuff, your defense is my defense for a long time, which is that I don't believe this stuff because technology will save us, because technology has always saved us, because Elon Musk is going to solve these problems for us. And if you believe that, go work for Elon Musk. And if you don't like Elon Musk, then go work for any of 1,000 other companies that are trying to transition us away from oil, right? And I don't just mean like drive your car less, because it's all oil, right? Everything in this room is made out of oil. All of this clothes has some carbon footprint, right? All of this stuff was shipped from somewhere, right? And we're not even aware of that stuff. And then for the other group of people, and I don't know if I'm in this group or not, but there's a group of people who basically say, we can't stop this. Nothing that we can do, enzymes or not, is going to prevent what's happening from happening. And if you believe that, then you should also be doing something. And that is you should be bracing yourself. Seriously, right? Here's this fatalistic way of thinking that we have. In the movie Fight Club, right? One of my favorite movies, right? Tyler Durden says, you know that brace position on an airplane? They make you do that because that way, if the plane crashes, you'll snap your neck right away and you'll die very quickly. I wondered about that. I looked that up. I was like, is that true? And actually, it's not true at all. In fact, there have been plane crashes where there was one person in brace position, that person survived, everyone else died. Because what brace position is, you're going to hit something, your head is going to fly forward and hit the seat in front of you, and that's going to kill you. But if you put your head on the seat in front of you, it just kind of smashes your face into it. You have a chance of surviving. The closer you can get to a low-energy society, the more likely you are to survive when things fall apart and finally start to reach you. So what kind of stuff does that mean? Like I said, expect more disasters. Expect longer recovery times. Expect a decrease in supplies of food and goods from faraway places. Start walking. Start cycling. Right? Figure out like how you would get around if you couldn't afford gasoline anymore. Get used to using electricity. If you can, put solar in your house. Right? If you can't, because you live in the city, then start, pressing on your elected officials or run for office yourself, right? I don't understand why politics can interfere with science and engineering, but science and engineering can't interfere with politics. That's bullshit. That has to stop, right? Instead of shopping at big box stores, support your local economy. Again, this is Italy. I understand that most of the food comes from here anyway, and great clothes also come from here. It's like on the airplane, right? They say put on your own mask before assisting others. This is what you need to be doing. You need to be putting on your own mask. You need to figure out where your food is coming from. You need to be figuring out where your water is coming from. You need to be figuring out where your power is coming from. You need to make sure that you live in a community where you know that the people there are going to have your back when something goes wrong. Right? This isn't just Milano, this is the commune, right? Comune di Milano, which is because in medieval times when everything sucked, this was a group of people who had each other's backs, and that's why it survived to this very day, and that's the world that we need to go back to, right? I started gardening this year. I've killed every plant, but this year I started trying to learn to grow my own food, right? If I can make a computer dance, I can grow my own food, right? And get your money out of the damn banks, right? The financial system is just nothing but corruption. If you're saving for retirement, you're deluding yourself. Take that money out, buy yourself some solar cells, and prepare for a low-energy future, because even if we can't prevent collapse, we can still improve our chances of surviving by adapting to a low-energy lifestyle. This is not a binary problem, right? It's not a question of either nothing happens or we go back to the Stone Age. The fact is that the things that we need to do to prepare ourselves for the coming collapse are the same things that we would need to do to eventually halt the collapse. We will probably recover at some point between here and the extinction of our civilization, and the faster that we, especially we, the engineering class, who understand that we have the power to make these things happen, if we actually start doing these things, if we stop just listening to what we ourselves want to do, and we start paying attention to the most important thing, then we can actually stop this thing and we can actually survive as a species. Every day I remind myself, this is real. This is happening. Any questions?